Clarity, thinking clearly about life's tough topics. And this morning, our tough topic is clarity about the end time. Clarity about the end time. So if I asked you the question this morning about what type of ice cream is the best, I would get dozens of different answers. Now, I could try to convince you, right, that Moose Tracks is the best ice cream there is. But the reality is those types of things really come down to a matter of taste and preference. And so a lot of the debates we have are kind of fun debates because that's what they are. They're matters of taste preference. Like we can debate, and I can tell you why the 1986 Boston Celtics is the best single-season basketball team ever. I could talk to you about why Batman is better than Superman, right? We could have those types of debates, but they're just preferences. They're just about our tastes, what we like more. But there are other things like why life is sacred, why there is a moral standard, why we are living in a created universe instead of just an accidental one, that are worth talking about. They're not just matters of opinion. They're not just matters of taste or preference. They're matters of truth. But in order to engage in those types of conversations, we need to know why we believe what we believe. We need to know the truth, the foundation behind those things. And that's why that's the purpose behind this sermon series, right? To help us think clearly about some of life's topics. See, Christians are to use the Bible to construct a worldview that helps them understand the world. Christians are to use the Bible to help construct a worldview, a way that we see reality, the world around us, that gives us an understanding for the world that we live in. That is what we need to do. Now, to be honest, right, the Bible doesn't give us specific answers to all of our questions. Like, it doesn't provide us a specific answer on the proper use of technology and AI, all right? And that's a big question that our culture has, that the people in the Bible don't have any knowledge of whatsoever. It doesn't necessarily answer the question of who should I vote for. It doesn't necessarily answer the question of which economic system is the best. There's all these questions that we have that are legitimate, important questions that the Bible doesn't talk about directly. But what we want the Bible to do is to give us this framework, this way of looking at the world to help us guide through these topics, these questions that we have in life. The Bible does provide a framework for us to think through the questions and topics our generation faces. Now, the end time discussion is one that brings a lot of speculation and distraction. Right? We can spend a lot of time, well, the Bible says this prophecy says that. We can talk a lot about that. Not only does it bring speculation and distraction, but it also brings a lot of confusion and division. Like, what does this mean? You're reading through the book of Revelation, like, what in the world is all this about? Right? And sometimes people get so committed to their view of the end time that it causes division among Christians. And that's why I think this is an important topic to have in our tough Life's Tough Topics series. Like, how do we think clearly or well through the topic of end times? Now, my point here this morning is not to convince you this view of the end times is the correct view. Like, that is way above my pay grade. That is way more than I can accomplish in one single sermon. My objective here this morning is provide us a foundation for, as we come to what the Bible says about the end time, that we can think well about it, that it can help us as we follow Jesus. So I just want to here quickly give you the 5 major views that are most common in the United States as we look at the end time. So the first one is called dispensational premillennialism. And this is by far the most popular view of the end time in the United States. But it is also the newest view of the end time. It came out in the mid-1800s. But it's the most popular. It focuses on the millennium, which is a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus here on earth, and it focuses on the tribulation, right, and the rapture before the tribulation happens. So sometimes it's called pre-trib premillennialism. Like, the church is going to be rescued out before the tribulation happens, and so that's that view. A second view, which this is probably the oldest view, not that it was always called this, but there's parts of it that can be traced back very early in church history, and that is historic premillennialism. And one of the things that makes this different than the dispensational is that there is no rapture, that the church goes through the tribulation and remains faithful before the reign of Jesus, which is, again, a literal 1,000-year period. The third is postmillennialism. Now, postmillennialism is the belief that Christ will return after the millennium, after the 1,000 years, which is more symbolic than literal, and that at that end there will be a period of global peace and Christian influence, and then Jesus will come and reign. Now, the thing about postmillennial is that it was the dominant view in the United States in the 1800s. With the way life was improving, people were thinking, oh, this is it. We're getting better and better and better. In fact, the song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, is a post-millennial song. Because what people saw was that, oh, this is the work of the Union Army. It's going to usher in the millennial. And Jesus is going to come. My eyes have seen thy glory. And so that was the dominant view. And then the early 1900s come, and what happens? 2 world wars. That kind of puts a damper on people thinking, oh, life is getting better. And so that fell out of favor. Another interesting thing is postmillennialism is on the rise in popularity again. In fact, it's very much connected with Christian nationalism, real Christian nationalism. And because what they view is that the Great Commission, go and make disciples of nations, not just the people of nations, but all the nations, to usher in the reign of Jesus. So then the fourth view is that of amillennialism, which the millennial, again, it's not a literal time, and most of the prophecies we find in the Bible have taken place. And we are in the millennial. We're in the church age as Jesus' kingdom grows. And this is the view that I align with. This is where I fall within these five. And then the last one is called preterism, which comes from the Latin in the past. And so preterism is the belief that all this happened in the past. Specifically, even the return of Jesus happens in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple. So those are the five major views. And as I said, we could sit here and we could debate. We could get in deep into the details of all of those. And we could discuss them. And it would bring confusion and division, and it would be just a mess. But on top of that, we could also speculate about all these other prophecies, right? We could go back into the Old Testament. We could spend time in Revelation. What does all that mean? But then on top of it all, it's just our familiarity with apocryphal language. Apocrypha is a different word. Apocalyptic literature is something that we don't understand. We don't really have that type of genre in our culture. The closest thing, and I've said this before, the closest thing that we have to apocalyptic literature are political cartoons. So when you see in a political cartoon, you know that a donkey represents the Democratic Party, and the elephant represents the Republican Party. You see that, and you don't think it's a literal donkey and a literal elephant, right? You understand the symbolism. Or another way we can talk about that is hopefully tomorrow's headlines in Denver will read this: the Broncos stomp the Jets, right? Like we don't think, oh, this horse just crushed all these Jets. We understand that is symbols, right? And so a lot of times the reason we kind of struggle with biblical prophecy is we don't quite understand the symbolism behind it. That oftentimes when the Bible talks about the moon and the sun and the stars, it's talking about either the spiritual powers that are there or kings and queens and kingdoms. And so when the moon falls or the stars fall, it's not literally happening. Rather, it's describing the fall of kingdoms and kings. And so those are just some of the difficulties we have when we come to this discussion about the end time. And we're trying to figure all of this out. But I think if we take a step back, and we look at the picture as a whole, we can understand what the Bible is teaching us about the end. So what is the Bible's purpose in teaching about the end time? Well, first of all, we need to understand that the purpose is not to provide us with a detailed blueprint of what's going to happen. The purpose is not to give us a detailed blueprint about what happens or what will happen. Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. Jesus is saying here, however, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself, only the Father knows. So Jesus here, what's happening is Jesus is with his disciples. They're in Jerusalem. And Jesus has told his disciples that the temple, which they think is this magnificent place, that it's all going to be destroyed. And the question that the disciples asked Jesus is this: when is this all going to take place? How will we know that this is taking place? And that's the question that Jesus is asking or answering. So, from my point of view, now you can accept this or not, from my point of view, all that we find here and at the end, from the end of Matthew chapter 23 through Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is talking not about his second coming, but about the destruction of Jerusalem and specifically the temple. But other people will say, oh, this has implications about Jesus' second coming. But I think the point here that what Jesus is saying, nobody knows the day or the hour, applies also to his second coming. Because it was very common for Jewish scholars, even at the time of Jesus, to have this tension of knowing that God has ordained when certain things will happen, but he hasn't revealed when those things will happen. So the times have been ordained, but he hasn't revealed that to us. And that applied with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD that we can look back on and say, oh, that's when that happened. And it also applies to the return of Jesus when he comes and makes everything right. No one knows except for God. God knows the time. He has put that in position. He has set the time for that. So Jesus is teaching us that these questions about when will this happen, how will we know, are really misguided. That distracts us from what is the most important thing. So Jesus emphasized that we cannot know the exact time of his return, which implies the exact details are not the focus. The details are not the important thing. The important thing is this is what's going to happen. Judgment is going to happen. Jesus is going to return. That is the focus. That's what we need to pay attention to. So think of it like a weather report, right? They tell you to be prepared. And we kind of see this right now. The hurricane comes. You're to be prepared. You don't know all the details of what that's going to be like. Just be prepared. So that no matter what comes, you'll be ready. And that's what the warning or the prediction or the promise of Jesus' return is. It's when it's going to happen, the things surrounding it, that's not the important thing. What is important is, are you prepared when it happens? Be prepared for it to happen. And that brings us here to the second thing is, what is the purpose in teaching about the end time? The purpose is a call to be ready. Matthew chapter 24, verses 42 through 44. So you too must keep watch, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. A faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. I tell you the truth, the master will put that servant in charge of all that he owns. But what if the servant is evil and thinks my master won't be back for a while? And he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk? The master will return unannounced and unexpected, and he will cut the servant to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the verses between verse 36 and 42 again, illustrate this point of the unexpectedness of when this is going to happen. That it's going to happen suddenly. It's going to happen when you least expect it. And then here Jesus tells these couple parables to illustrate this. You need to be ready. Because if somebody knew exactly when it's going to happen, hey, they could goof off and then at the last minute change. But Jesus says that's not, the point isn't that you will be ready, that you can do whatever you want and then at the last minute be ready. No, the point is that you live in a way that represents King Jesus all the time. And when you live in that way, what's going to happen? You're going to be ready. You're going to be prepared for when he comes back. Like if you knew your house was going to get broken into, you'd make sure that night it's secure. But the reality is that we don't know. And so you have to make sure your house is secure every night. And if you were put in charge of the household and the master goes away and you're like, oh, I have time to party. I can do whatever I want. Well, then you're not going to be prepared if the master comes back early, are you? You're not going to be actually doing the master's will while he's gone. So be prepared. Whenever this happens, you need to be prepared. And this is why a football team or a basketball team practices. Right? They know the game is coming, but they don't know how that game is going to play out. That is why they need to practice so they can be prepared for whatever happens. The point of practice is to be prepared. The point of living a faithful life is so we can be prepared when Jesus comes back. We don't have to worry about, is it today, tomorrow, when? No, we are prepared for him to return. The primary message of Jesus regarding the end time is a call to readiness, not speculation. It's a call to readiness. We need to be ready. We need to be prepared. So when we continue to be faithful in our discipleship, when we continue to follow Jesus and we grow in maturity in our faith, as we develop that fruit of the Spirit in our life, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and all the rest. That as we do that, we are prepared for whatever the future holds. Temptation, persecution, our death, right? Or the return of Jesus. When the unexpected happens, we will be ready. So then how do we avoid the pitfalls of speculation when it comes to the end time? Well, first of all, we need a hope for the return of Jesus. We put our hope in the return of Jesus. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. Now, just part of what Paul's writing, both of his letters to the Thessalonians is about, is to help clear up some confusion about the end time. One of the things that people were doing is, not everybody, but there were some in Thessalonica who was like, oh, Jesus is going to return, so I'm going to sell my stuff, and I'm just going to wait for him to return. And while they were doing that, they were relying on the charity of others. It's one of the reasons why in writing this letter, Paul will say, hey, if you don't work, you don't get to eat. Like if you're just waiting around, you don't just get to live off the charity of others. So Paul's writing to clear up some confusion there. And so this is what he writes here in chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. First, the Christians who have died will rise from their graves. Then, together with them, we who are still alive and remain on earth will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Then we will be with the Lord forever. So encourage each other with these words. So here's the image, is that Jesus is coming down from heaven to establish his kingdom here on earth. And when his coming is announced, those who are dead are risen, and they join this processional in the air as they come to earth. And then those of us who are alive, we join the processional. It is the image of the Roman emperor coming into a Roman colony, where people from the colony, the leading officials, go out to meet Caesar and to usher him into the town, into the city. Because as we read in Revelation, at the end of Revelation, what happens is that heaven and earth come, and God's city is established in the new heaven and in the new earth. And so we meet him. And so what Paul is saying, let that be your reality. Let that be your hope. That one day Jesus is going to come and he's going to make everything right. He's going to bring justice. He's going to bring healing. He's going to bring life. And so you trust in him to come. That's where your hope is. Don't get caught up in speculation and debate. No, put your hope firmly on this image of Jesus coming and us being with him. Paul says, let those words be an encouragement to each other. Encourage each other with this hope that Jesus is coming. And so if we are up and speculating and debating, and we get all nervous about, whoa, the tribulation, and we get this and this, and we're nervous and we're fearful, we've missed the point. The point is for us to live hopeful lives, trusting in the goodness and love of Jesus. Not only should we put our hope in the return of Jesus, but we also need to remember that what we know is enough. Continuing on here into chapter 5. Now, concerning how and when all this will happen, dear brothers and sisters, we don't really need to write to you, for you know quite well that the day of the Lord's return will come unexpectedly like a thief in the night. When people are saying everything is peaceful and secure, then disaster will fall on them, and suddenly, as a pregnant woman's labor pains begin, and there will be no escape. So Paul is echoing the words of Jesus here, right? He says, I don't need to write to you anymore about what's going to this end time stuff is going to look like, because what you know is already enough. It's going to come unexpectedly when people are saying, oh, all is good, things are peaceful, you don't need to worry about anything. What you know is enough. And we want to know. We want to have that knowledge. We think that if we know the signs of the time, right, that we can be prepared. And the message of Jesus is, no, you need to be prepared whether or not you know those signs or not. You need to be prepared. You need to be faithful in Jesus. So we're not to be overly concerned about the time, but to live in the reality that Jesus will return. We can't get wrapped up in the speculations as we read the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, trying to connect the dots. You're not going to be able to. The best way to be prepared for the second appearing of Jesus, for judgment, is to be faithful. So the Bible does reveal that this world will not last forever, that there will be an end, that there will be an end to the life as we know it. But the purpose of the Bible's teaching is not to provide us with a detailed explanation of what will happen, but to encourage God's people to be faithful. So we need to avoid the temptation of speculating about what the end time is going to be like, and put our hope securely in the return of Jesus as we seek to be faithful. So here's our big idea this morning. We are to live prepared for the end. We are to live prepared for the end. And that's how we are to live. And I don't care what view of the end time you hold, if it's not bringing you to be prepared that for the end, then you need to reevaluate it. There are good, faithful Christians who hold to all those positions. So the view, having the right view, is not the point. Point is it leading you to be faithful? Is it leading you to be prepared for what happens? Because you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if that knowledge isn't leading you to be prepared, then it's worthless. The point is, are we being faithful to Jesus no matter what? Because when we are faithful to Jesus, then we are prepared for him to return, for the life as we know it to come to an end. Here's our challenge this week. Ask yourself, are you living today as if Jesus could return tomorrow? Are you prepared in your heart, mind, and actions for Jesus to come? Now, thankfully, we have this thing called grace and forgiveness too, right? We don't need to be perfect. But it's worth thinking about, am I really prepared for the return of Jesus? And if there are things in your life, we need to confess them, and seek forgiveness, and continue on this path of discipleship as we mature in our faith. Luke chapter 12, verses 35 through 40, says this: Be dressed for service and keep your lamps burning, and as though you were waiting for your master to return from the wedding feast. Then you will be ready to open the door and let him in the moment he arrives and knocks. The servants who are ready and waiting for his return will be rewarded. I tell you the truth, he himself will seat with them, put on an apron. He himself will seat them and put on an apron and serve them as they set meat. He may come in the middle of the night or just before dawn, but whenever he comes, he will reward the servants who are ready. He will reward those servants who are ready. If our understanding of the end time doesn't make us more faithful to Jesus, then we have missed the point. I'm more concerned that we live faithful lives than I am that we have the right understanding of what the end will be like. So make sure you are loyal to King Jesus, that's where your allegiance is, with King Jesus. And when it is, you can be confident that you are prepared for his return.